So thank you for joining us for this next presentation. So I'm delighted to introduce our next speakers. So we have Yar Jabbar and Georgia Tickle from National Grid joining us. So Yar is a senior energy analyst in the market analytics team at National Grid, and he supports the team in pan-European market modelling, scenario analysis, with responsibilities for spanning optimization, modelling of the UK and European wholesale markets, scenario planning, investment case evaluation, socio-economic impact assessments of projects such as interconnectors, and he brings deep insight into the challenges and opportunities facing the UK's energy infrastructure today. Joining him is Georgia, the senior energy market analyst who provides actionable insights across the business, from modelling transmission constraints, valuing transmission investments, to generating price forecasts that support National Grid's UK interconnectors, US offshore wind and renewable energy business. Georgia's work is helping shape how National Grid engages with emerging technologies and meets the evolving needs of the customers. So together, Yar and Georgia will be sharing National Grid's view today on the future grid and the role of offshore hybrid assets. So if you could all join me in welcoming Georgia and Yar to the stage, please.
Good afternoon and welcome. It's a pleasure to be here today, especially given the great weather outside. Just as Sandy's alluded to, my name is Georgia Tickle. I'm here with my colleague Yar Jabbar. We're both senior energy market analysts at National Grid. Our team focuses on supporting various corporate functions in navigating the energy policy landscape and in quantifying any potential business impacts. We do this predominantly through energy market modeling with Plexos, but through other avenues as well. But today we're here to talk to you about the role of offshore hybrid assets in the future electricity grid. As some of you may know, National Grid Ventures and our European partners jointly own and operate around 8 gigawatts of interconnection capacity, with our most recent addition being Viking Link with Denmark, which came into operation in December of 2023. But in an environment where governments are increasingly seeking to tackle the energy trilemma, why are interconnectors so important? Interconnectors allow countries to trade electricity, sending excess power to where it's needed and importing it when domestic supply is low. They can also help prevent renewable energy from being curtailed and allow countries to purchase cheaper power from other sources. In Great Britain, we're privileged to be able to import hydro from Norway, biomass from Denmark, and nuclear from France. And when we have excess wind generation on our system, we can share this with our neighbours as well, as we saw on the bank holiday weekend where we had an abundance of negative prices. As you can tell on the chart on the left-hand side, we rely quite heavily on our French neighbours. But in 2022, when the French nuclear output fell to its lowest level in 30 years, we were finally able to pay back our dues. This is a prime example of the security of supply that interconnectors can provide. But how can we take this a step further? This is where offshore hybrid assets come in. In the past, we've built point-to-point interconnectors and radially connected offshore wind, where an offshore wind farm will connect directly to shore. But with an offshore hybrid asset, we can combine cross-border interconnection with generation capacity, creating a dual functionality asset that reduces CapEx expenditure, further facilitates cross-border flows, and produces socioeconomic welfare. Within the OHA umbrella, we have a variety of different designs. We have a multi-purpose interconnector, where you have 2 connecting countries, and both of which have offshore wind in their respective markets. You have a non-standard interconnector, an NSI, where you have 2 connecting countries, but you only have offshore wind in the connecting countries market. And then you have mesh grids, where you have multiple connecting countries and multiple offshore wind farms, all linked, creating a network. Given the variety of designs that are available, there are many questions that need to be answered across a variety of different actors in order to assess and enable the realization of projects. Are there benefits in building the OHA? Is it commercially viable? How do we go about allocating benefits, revenues, and costs across multiple entities? What are the optimal connecting countries or configurations? Plexos allows us to provide quantitative answers to these questions, liaise with our stakeholders, and therefore enable the realization of projects.
Sure, thanks, Georgia. So picking up from where my colleague just ended, to be able to actually understand what are the investability and the commercial viability of bringing on an offshore hybrid asset, we need to understand what are some of the tools that we can use to sort of provide a quantitative understanding behind this. One that is available to developers and modelers is the cost-benefit analysis. Now, what this cost-benefit analysis does is that it quantitatively assesses the cost and benefit of having an offshore hybrid asset. And here, when we talk about the offshore hybrid asset, we are looking at the hybrid interconnector, which is the interconnector linking the two offshore generation hubs between the two countries involved, or just one country where the offshore generation hub is located. Now, doing a cost-benefit analysis is not just placing a CBA ratio on just the OHA that we are assessing, but we have to understand the relativity behind it. So we have to understand what is the cost and benefit of having the OHA, which is the factual, and what is the cost and benefit of not having it, which is the counterfactual. Now, to develop that counterfactual scenario as well, we need to have a plausible alternative. To be able to do that, we need to determine the network and offshore generation capabilities of both the factual and the counterfactual. For the counterfactual, we believe that we remove the offshore hybrid asset, which is the hybrid interconnector, from the modeling system. And for the offshore generation capacities, we believe that it's going to be the same for both the alternative, which is the counterfactual and the factual. And what we are doing here is that with the counterfactual, this will be radially connected. So you see the offshore generation hubs being radially connected in the counterfactual than the factual. Now, once we clearly define what goes in for our counterfactual and factual, this is where Plexos comes in. So Plexos allows us to do like a day-ahead dispatch modeling, where we sort of put in a lot of our inputs, and this input or project input will be on the level of granularity and the data we do have. So for like our hybrid asset that we might be assessing, we'll be looking at what is the line capacity of this hybrid asset, how do we configure it, is it in an OHA perspective or is it with an MPI? And we also have to understand what are the losses that might accrue on the line, what is the line rating, what is the start date, what is the end date, and that feeds into the XML or the modeling that we do in Plexos. Now we know that we also have to understand that the market is uncertain, so we have to look at the scenario perspective. I'll look at it in the next slide, but we also do all this configuration with a scenario. Then it's sort of, the dispatch sort of calculates a set of indicators or key performance index that allows us to do that CBA. Now, apart from the benefits and the costs that we are actually going to look at, the market dispatch provides a lot of output to do the benefits framework, and the cost as well, we look at it from the CapEx and the OpEx. So the CapEx, we are looking at the capital expenditure of the infrastructure identified, and OpEx is the operating expenditure of the infrastructure identified. Now, there are some modeling aspect that is out of scope because of obviously the complexity and the level of data that we need to do that, which is around the grade model, because when you look at the multi-criteria analysis, when you are doing a cost-benefit analysis, there are some aspects in the benefits section that looks at grade losses that this grade model can inform. But for the purposes of this OHA still being a burgeoning or a new asset that we are still trying to delineate, we sort of leave it out of the scope, but it is something that we are trying to develop as well. Yeah, so as I said, we know the future is uncertain. We don't even know what's going to happen in the power system next week because a lot of things change. When we do the model, we do it through different scenarios. And with National Grid, we have our 3 scenarios where we look at the balance pathway, which is sort of our base case. This considers the concentration effort on boosting renewables and electrification growth, but at least it falls short on some targets. Now, the 2 extreme ends will be the electric net zero, which is the higher electrification and push towards modeling rest target on time. So we consider some of the CP30 targets. And at least we look at the delayed transition as well. So this looks at some slow growth in renewables, and we also consider some of these affordability issues that we've been talking about when we look at the trilemma. We also understand that doing all these scenarios, the techno-economic parameters on our inputs will vary. So things on our commodity prices, our generation profiles, our cross-border transfer capacities, all this will change. And one thing that also helped with the Plexos stuff is that gone are the days we were using the desktop, but now we are sort of using a lot on the Plexos cloud as well. So migrating as of last December has allowed us to churn out a lot of simulations that we would have done when we were doing some of this modeling in the previous years. Some of the outputs that we are key to look at will be on the electricity prices, of course, and the interconnector flows, the CO2 emissions, the generation mix, and the power plant revenues. These are all some of the key indexes that Plexus churn out for us to be able to do that CBA or the cost-benefit analysis framework. Now, you also have to understand that we do this on a reference grid. So we look at 30-year horizon from 2025 to like 2060. And why we do this is that we want to understand what's the combinations of supply and demand we have in 2025 or 2030 is going to be different from what we have in 2040. And all this have implications on the revenues that our developers can accrue, which is our national grid ventures. Moving forward, so when we do the modeling in Plexus and all that, and we get our results, we look at some key performance index, as I said, and this allows us to do some multi-criteria analysis. Now, the multi-criteria analysis is into 3 sections. So the multi-criteria analysis looks at the benefits, the cost, and the residual impact. For these different toolboxes, there are a lot of different KPIs that we can look at, but for our modeling sake, for the benefit tranche, we looked at socioeconomic welfare and CO2 societal savings and risk curtailment savings. But there are other benefits that we can look at. We can look at adequacy, we can look at grid losses, as I said, but for what we are doing and for how we model our stuff, we only focus on these few things. And what we do from the socioeconomic welfare is that we are looking at what are the benefits of the increased market integration as a result of the offshore hybrid assets. And this looks at surpluses from both the producer, consumer, and the transmission owner. And all this is triggered by what cross-border flows as a result of price signals that ensure once we have that hybrid interconnector, which allows that flow to happen. For the CO2 savings, we know that the different alternatives and the different scenarios that we've modeled comes with its own generation profiles. Now, when we do that in Plexus, it also brings us the different emissions that we can accrue for every year or the horizon that we are looking at. And this gives us also some values that we can actually apply some quantitative analysis on it. On the risk curtailment savings, we know that our grid is sometimes constrained, and this leads to constrained costs that actually consumers have to bear at a point in time. So sometimes, in order for developers to make that case for regulators like Ofgem and all that, we can also look at the curtailment savings that we can accrue as a result of having that offshore hybrid asset. So we do that assessment as well. So once we've done the modeling and all that, some of the results that we actually see in our modeling from our side of view is that it allows us to assess that flows on OHA enables increased price convergence and bring socioeconomic welfare and wider benefits for both regions. That is the 2 countries involved in setting up either the non-standard interconnector or the offshore hybrid asset that we are looking at. Normally, we see in our system that over time, there's going to be price convergence thanks to market coupling or a lot of risk coming into the system. But once we bring in that OHA, we see that this price convergence is further enhanced because there is a lot of flows that is going on. So we see a lot of flows from region B to region A, and as a result of that, region A prices will fall, enabling a positive consumer surplus, but revenues for generators will actually decline because now they are exposed to some lower prices in the other region where there's a cross-border flow. For region B, average prices will rise, boosting generator revenues because generators are now also exposed to higher prices in the higher region, but it lowers a little bit on the consumer surplus. When we look at different types of OHA design that I've talked about, it comes with different combinations of cost and benefit that we can accrue. When we look at option 1 and option 2, at least when we increase that line in option 2, so the line capacity of option 2 maybe was, let's say line 1 was 1 gig and we now moved it to 2 gig, we see that there's some enhanced socioeconomic welfare components, but it also comes with its own cost. When we design an MPI, we see that even adding additional wind reduces cross-border flows, which has its own impact on socioeconomic welfare and wider benefits as well. So what we are trying to say is that when we are designing this, we do a lot of dispatch running and we do a lot of simulations, which helps us to make an informed decision on which one to go for and why we are going for it. That is why, the Plexus stuff is really good to be doing that. We know, I don't know if much of you guys know, but National Grid is actually developing some 2 pilots, non-standard interconnectors. These are Lion Link and Nautilus, and these run from GB to high voltage direct current to offshore converter stations linked to offshore wind farms in both the Netherlands and the Belgian waters. And these are Lion Link and Nautilus. And when you look at the Lion Link, it is a direct connection of like 2 gigawatts wind from the Dutch offshore wind development zone. When you look at the Nautilus, this is a potential to connect around 3.5 gig to the Belgian offshore wind zone. And these ones are expected to come online by 2030. As a result of still going through a regulatory process and all that, we cannot release a lot of information on these 2 assets. But what we can do is that recently, Ofgem gave us the green light for the Lion Link and Nautilus to progress from the initial project assessment stage. And now they have been given the go-ahead to do a final development stage, subject to fulfilling their conditions from their IPA, which is their initial project assessment stage. Yeah, so as I said, doing this whole thing is bound to uncertainty. So we need a lot of robust assessment to work on it. That's why we look at sensitivities and all that. In National Grid, some of these key things that we do to ensure robustness is that we sometimes tweak the climate years we are using. We sometimes change the commodity prices. We even sometimes tweak the offshore generation capacities that we do have. So these are some of the questions we would like to pose to the crowd, and we'll see whether we can get some answers. But we've also seen from our modeling bit is that when we do even a zonal pricing in GB, we know that the RIMA discussion is ongoing. And once we look at it from our perspective, let's envision we have a RIMA, how would that affect revenue portfolios for our pilot schemes? And we see that even where the lines connect, the hybrid asset connects to the zone in GB comes with its own different variations in revenues as opposed to the national model that we now have. We also look at the cross-border adjustment mechanism. We realized that a few weeks ago, we had the UK, EU have these trade negotiations going on and all that. But before that, we were seriously modeling the impact that CBAM will have on these assets because they'll be penalized for flows in case of like there's this premium CO2 emissions that are higher than what we see in the European region. But now, thanks to the trading organizations and what is going on between UK and EU now, more fostering a lot of integration. Let's see how that goes. Also, as I said, we've looked at system constraint cost. But one thing we also want to say is that what is the most suitable market design? We know that the offshore generation hubs, the good way to go about it, or what Ofgem is now clearly talking about, is more of an offshore bidding zone. But yeah, some people are still opposed to that spectrum as well. So on all these things have implications on the cost and benefits, as I've said. What is the most suitable commercial framework? This is more to the developers, further the technical design, market fundamentals, all this have influence on the revenue generation per line that we see in our hybrid asset. So all in all, I mean, what we presented here looks at how an offshore hybrid asset can be assessed and look at how we can quantitatively put some numbers on that. Now, what we do in Plexus is really key for our National Grid Ventures track because they need these answers to make an informed decision when they are submitting anything to any regulator. So thank you very much, and yeah, hoping to hear some nice questions from you guys.
I'll give it to the back.
Hi, thank you for that. Question on what it seems to do, what you're modelling, is kind of assuming that things operate pretty perfectly competitively. So kind of the real world goes a little bit awry from that. And I think some of the flows over the interconnectors have shown that. Are you able to model that as sensitivities, and does it affect your analysis? Because the world's not always as nice as it should be.
The world's never perfect, especially in fundamentals modeling. But liaising with stakeholders helps us to understand how we can tailor certain inputs into Plexus, say ramp rates, to get a more reflective flow. If you get like a tiny price differential, you don't get perfect flow, right? That's not how traders operate. So I think it's important to always be fairly open with the assumptions that you have within your modeling. So you can say, hey, I'm getting these kind of flows, but that's not exactly perfect. How can I bring it closer to reality? I think that's where those discussions are key.
Yeah, even with the modeling itself in Plexus, we've seen some changes and variations where, like in the real world, a little spike in price spreads doesn't really look at a lot of flows, but when we do the modeling, once there's a little trip in price spreads, we see a lot the flow being maximized. So these are some of the things we even have conversations with Energy Exemplar to find ways around it to resolve it. So it's still in the works, but yeah, we'll keep you in the loop.
Oh, we've got many a question.
Hi, it's Constantine from Madrid. I have a question on if you've quantified the benefits of a traditional interconnector versus an MPI, what that perhaps looks like. This is one question. And I had a second one on the scenarios that you showed. I was wondering if this broadly follow the FES or is like completely different
Okay.
scenarios.
Yeah, I can take the scenario part, then you can take the first one. So the scenarios, obviously, we don't model it in isolation. We look at what is going on in the market, at least we see what the first workbook says. But we have our own internal team where we do our bottom-up approach. We look at how the market's going to look like by looking at policy papers, looking at data sets, looking at trajectories from TOs, and we model the pan-European market, right? So we look at different combinations on how we envision the NECP target is supposed to evolve over time and all that. And it is always evolving, right? So once we do this stuff, we always make sure that we reflect that in the quantitatives that we do. So sometimes we provide a haircut on some of the assumptions that these like policy makers make. So something like a CP30 saying offshore 50 gig or something, in our balance pathway is like 40 gig, because we envision that some of these issues on supply chain can actually affect the growth to hit that target. So it's not necessarily just following one spectrum, but a combination of everything. At the same time, our internal assessments as well will provide us with the scenarios or the pathways to go ahead with it. Thank you.
So you have an internal view informed by all
Yeah,
these sources.
exactly.
We have our own internal FES model as well that uses
Yeah.
the exact numbers from FES, because that's often needed for other modeling. But we have
Exactly.
our own internal views that are informed by FES but don't follow it perfectly. And to your first question was, how do we go about assessing an MPI?
Yeah, so it's interesting. These projects cost more, right? The
Oh, yeah,
hybrid projects. They're-
Compared to radially connected offshore wind, not necessarily. So the counterfactual is two offshore, let's say for an MPI, you've got the interconnection point. Yeah, sorry. What was your counter?
But if you compare, if the wind farm doesn't exist, right?
But then it's not the same comparison.
Sorry?
It's not the same comparison because you don't have that wind in that country.
Okay, regardless of that. Have you quantified where I'm getting to is, I think, a difference is that the redispatch cost is lower, right? Because you export directly. But I got a hint, you said you're modeling that component, the redispatch. So I'm just wondering if there are other benefits that you've quantified.
The ones that we've quantified is the ones that we showed here, but I mean, I can take that on board and look at that. Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
I think to stress, the element that we don't model is the power system flows,
Yeah.
not the redispatch. So we do have constraint costs in that element of redispatch, if that's what you're alluding to. We can take it offline.
Hello. Interesting presentation.
Thank you.
Do you get any credit for reliability and capacity in your analysis? And the second question, would storage also add any value into the assessment?
What do you mean by reliability capacity? Sorry.
Well, you're providing a hedge into both markets. You have some arbitrage that you're there. Is there either a capacity mechanism or some other way of getting paid for reliability, ancillary services, or other elements?
There is on the GB side.
Yeah.
On the European side, I'm not too familiar with it, but all point-to-point so far are part of the capacity market, so they do receive capacity market payments. That's not something that's in that sum, because we think of this as GB PLC or Netherlands PLC, so it's the greater good, not as purely on the developers' front. That would be quite selfish of us.
And storage?
Storage.
No.
We haven't considered the assets with storage. It's mostly with wind, but then going forward, it could be hydrogen, it could be electrolyzers, it could be batteries. With the Princess Elizabeth Island especially,
the
that's
energy island.
Yes.
Bit, so it depends on how we configure that energy island in the model, and it's also looks at coupling with storage as well. So yeah, that's why we look at different alternatives in setting up this OHA design. We just don't look at one spectrum. Thank you. Last one.
Very kind.
It's going to be an easy one. I'm Solwabu from NCCSA in SA. Mine is, I'm more interested in the complexity of this model that you're running, but in terms of one, the temporal resolution, given that you're not only looking at the GB, but you're looking at other markets as well. But are you running it, you know, hourly? How complicated is it? How long does it run? You know,
I mean,
not
yeah.
extending other factors like reliability and other.
Yeah, it's an hourly dispatch. And Plexus Cloud, as I just said, provides the avenue to do it in a very short possible time than what we used to do in the desktop. Because when we model it on the Plexus desktop, it used to take us like an hour or two to get one run done. But now that we have a lot of credits and
We parallelize
it in cloud and all that, we've been able to optimize our runs to get a lot within the shortest possible time. So, is that?
Only in the last few runs. The
In the last
stochastics
few
is quite
runs.
heavy because you have a lot
It's
more
very heavy, but,
CSVs
like,
to
we do the
import.
stochastics.
How many weather years?
Samples, just to get a sense, like how many samples would you run when you're running stochastics?
Oh, like
I'm
16,
trying to get a
right?
sense because
16, 1 to 16. Or
Yes, I
something.
think so.
Around 16 stochastic samples.
Yes. 16 weather years for stochastics.
Yeah.
16.
1, 6.
1 6, yes. 1
Yeah.
6, 1 6, not 60.
No, 60, 1, 6. Please. Yeah.
Whatever
yeah,
the-
so we
whatever
do the
they want.
stochastics to sort of show us the extremes as well, right?
Yes,
so
exactly.
once we do those 16 samples, we are able to provide a, yeah.
Okay, so I will make that the last question, but I know Yar and George are here for the next couple of days, so I know there is many more, so I'll save you
Catch
there,
us at the
but yeah,
party.
it'll be more of a share.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.